Japan lifts border restrictions and resumes visa-free travel. An interim injunction over the government's plan to invalidate COVID vaccination exemption certificates issued by 7 doctors. Hello and welcome to TVB News. Japan, one of the most sought-after tourist destinations in the world, lifted border restrictions and resumed visa-free travel today. But due to the pandemic, there are extra steps for travelers, such as checking vaccination records. Trevor Lee reports from Tokyo.
Finally, here we are in Japan a few years into the pandemic. But extra procedures were observed after landing at Narita Airport, Tokyo's main gateway to the world. Those who filled in the necessary information beforehand will be given a green code with a certificate. After scanning the green code at the counter, they will be issued with an information card, reminding travelers to observe social distancing rules, such as wearing masks. It took an hour and 15 minutes from landing to exiting the airport.
It's not just us who's opened up a lot more recently, so there was a lot more disconnect where people were traveling. There's less security in coming through. It's quicker, so it's nicer.
As the Japanese yen to Hong Kong dollar exchange rate hit new lows, things are apparently cheaper. For example, a 1,300 yen tempura, which used to cost 90 Hong Kong dollars, is now $20 cheaper. Travelers can install an app rolled out by the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare of Japan prior to their departure. They can fill in personal details, and if they are not triple jabbed, they must upload proof of a negative PCR conducted by specific contractors. The code will turn green after approval. We kicked off our trip from Hong Kong this morning. In the past, travelers could get an e-boarding pass after online check-in. As per Japan's requirements, the check-in must be done through counters. There's also something new at the e-channel. After downloading the I Am Smart app, user will only have to show a QR code and go through a face scan to get through clearance without having to show their ID. The airport's food court was renovated, but like many other shops, a lot of them were closed. But the highlights has to be this 28-meter-high sky bridge connecting Terminal 1 with the North Satellite Concourse. Some people call it Hong Kong's Tory Gate. Off we go, let's go to see some real ones soon. Just like pre-COVID times, travelers can make use of the flight time to fill in 2 forms, one for immigration and the other for customs. Trevor Lee, TVB News, Tokyo, Japan.
There were at least 8 direct flights from Hong Kong to Japan today. The first flight to Japan was an 8:50 a.m. flight to Fukuoka. Many were seen checking in at the city's airport this morning. Some say they're looking forward to eating sashimi at the Kuromon Ichaba market, adding they missed the food there. A passenger spent $3,000 on air tickets, adding he would follow anti-pandemic rules during the trip. Meanwhile, Hong Kong Express says 3 flights to Japan today were operating at 90% capacity. But the budget carrier was earlier criticized after it canceled most flights to Japan from January 15th. Its CEO, Mandy Ng, told the press today that the move was to let passengers have a clearer idea of its flight schedules. Still, she refrained from answering direct questions such as how many passengers or flights were involved. Ng added most of the affected flights have been rescheduled and affected passengers have been offered a refund. Hong Kong reported 4,656 COVID-19 cases today. That's around 200 cases fewer than yesterday's tally. This morning, Chief Executive John Lee hailed the success of the relaxed airport quarantine measure in helping boost the economy. When asked whether further steps will be taken to loosen anti-COVID measures, the CE said more considerations are needed. Timothy Lee has more.
The 0+3 arrangement for inbound travelers has been in place since last month. Chief Executive John Lee today said the measure has rejuvenated the tourism sector. Lee noted that the number of arrivals at the airport has risen by 30% compared with the last month, with foreign tourists rising by 80%. Accompanied by the recent relaxation of social distancing measures in the city's restaurants, some people are asking if it's time to adopt a 0+0 scheme.
We have introduced the 0+3 quarantine arrangement with good results, and many would like us to relax it further to 0+0 quarantine arrangements. But let me remind you that when I implemented 0+3, I did mention a number of uncertain factors which would require us to be cautious. The number of confirmed cases may rise, burdening our healthcare system. So we have to tread carefully before we consider the next step forward.
The take-up rates for 3 doses of COVID-19 vaccines in Hong Kong and Singapore are roughly similar. As Lee is set to deliver his first policy address later this month, will the government announce a schedule for Hong Kong to return to normalcy, following the example of Singapore? The CE believes the COVID policies of the SAR and other regions are not comparable.
We should not compare ourselves with Singapore because we have a different healthcare system. We have a different culture, people have different habits, so such a comparison is not meaningful.
The chief executive is also concerned about certain people who attempt to enter premises that requires the vaccine pass while they are still carrying the red or yellow color health code. He criticized them for undermining the city's efforts to combat the virus, and that they should be publicly denounced. Lee also commented on the fact that the enactment of Article 23 of the Basic Law has been deleted from the current year's legislative calendar. He said the government needs more time to assess the issue and the international geopolitical situation. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
Temporary relief for about 20,000 holders of COVID-19 vaccination medical exemption certificates. This as the High Court imposed an interim ban on the government's move to void dubious exemption documents issued by 7 doctors arrested earlier by the police. The government says it will act in accordance with the court's decision today until there are further instructions from an upcoming judicial review. Jackie Lin explains.
20,000 questionable exemption certificates issued by the 7 doctors were supposed to become invalid this Wednesday. That's before a legal challenge was filed by retired civil servant Kwok Chur-kin, a serial litigant dubbed the King of Judicial Reviews from Cheung Chau. In his writ, Kwok wrote that Secretary for Health Lo Chung-mau did not have the authority to invalidate the certificates. And the case involves not only huge public interest, with some 20,000 people affected, but it is also still undergoing legal procedures. Kwok added that the government's intended move would bar citizens with exemption certificates or without a Leave Home Safe app from heading out to join any activities. With that, he urged the court to rule Lo's decision as illegal and in breach of the International Bill of Human Rights. Judge Russell Coleman questions the legal basis for the health chief to revoke the exemptions already granted. The government lawyer representing the Secretary for Health says the certificates were allegedly issued without proper medical examination, therefore it is necessary to prevent their use. The lawyer says the government provides free clinical consultation for the affected citizens to obtain a new certificate. In the end, the court imposed an interim ban on the government's plan to nullify the exemption certificates until the judicial review hearing ends. That means the exemption documents will remain effective for now. Welcoming the move, Kwok Chur-kin says the government shouldn't rule the exemption certificates as invalid before they were found to be improperly issued. The judicial review hearing will begin on the 20th of the month. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Overseas, Ukrainians in the capital Kyiv were hunkering in bomb shelters today after Russia fired 4 more missiles. All 4, fired from bombers flying overhead, were shot down a day after 19 people were reportedly killed in massive strikes that hit major cities in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said today the Kremlin would not turn down a meeting between President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Joe Biden at a forthcoming G20 gathering. Nazvi Karim reports.
Standing in front of the rubble of a destroyed children's playground, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky saw it as the perfect opportunity to make a plea for more air defense weapons. And the United States is ever willing to help, with President Joe Biden putting out a statement condemning Russia and telling Zelensky in a phone call that more air defense systems were on the way. A surefire way to rile up Russian President Vladimir Putin even more. Putin is already under tremendous pressure after waves of recent Ukrainian successes on the battlefield, in which they have retaken hundreds of settlements in the east and south. The Russian president has already warned the West that further moves to arm Ukraine's military would take the conflict to a new level. The Kremlin's strikes on Kyiv came just as the UN General Assembly was about to embark on an already planned debate on whether to demand Russia reverts its decision to annex Ukraine's Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. In a diplomatic setback for Moscow, the 193-member General Assembly voted to reject Russia's call for the body to hold a secret ballot on whether to condemn the annexation of the four regions. On the battlefront, a Russian barrage pounded apartment buildings and other targets in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia, killing at least a dozen people, officials said. Nazri Karim, TVB News.
Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko said he and Russian President Vladimir Putin have agreed to create a joint regional grouping of troops. France has already warned Minsk that it could face more sanctions if it deepens its involvement in the Ukraine war. Lukashenko offered no details as to where or when such a grouping may be deployed. It comes amid his repeated claims that Ukraine is plotting an attack on Belarus. He has not produced any evidence to support these claims. In more than 7 months since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there has been no indication that Kyiv's forces are planning an attack on Belarus. And back here at home just days ago, a super yacht belonging to Russian billionaire Alexei Mordashov, who was sanctioned by the West, arrived and docked in Hong Kong. Responding to questions about whether SAR authorities will sanction the Russian oligarch's luxury vessel and his views on the West sanctioning some of the city's officials, the chief executive pointed to the importance of acting according to the law.
We will comply with any United Nations resolution on sanction because Hong Kong has the legal basis to enforce it. We cannot do and we will not do anything that has no legal basis. The second thing about the so-called sanction imposed on people in Hong Kong without justification, it is a very barbaric act because officials in Hong Kong do what is right to protect the interests of the country and the interests of Hong Kong. So we will just laugh off the so-called sanctions.
Good morning.
The government has not currently announced any plans to sanction or seize the super yacht.
Questions, as usual, no more than 2.
And still ahead after the break, the UN Security Council evaluating options to help free Haiti from gang violence that led to fuel shortages. A CLP executive says electricity bills will go up next year. And a record-breaking pumpkin in the United States. Welcome back to TVB News. The United Nations Security Council is reportedly evaluating options to help free Haiti from gang activity that has led to a scarcity of fuel, water, and other basic supplies. Among the proposals in a letter submitted to the Council by the UN Secretary General is the activation of peacekeeping forces for deployment to the crisis-hit Caribbean nation. Daniel Rao tells us more.
United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres' letter was submitted after Haitian Prime Minister Ariel Henry and 18 high-ranking officials requested the immediate deployment of a specialized armed force in sufficient quantity to stop the criminal actions of armed gangs across the country. This comes a month after one of Haiti's most powerful gangs seized control of a key fuel terminal in the capital of Port-au-Prince. Around 10 million gallons of diesel and gasoline and more than 800,000 gallons of kerosene are stored at the terminal. Subsequent spikes in fuel prices sparked mass protests in the city and across the country. Guterres' letter suggested the deployment of international forces would remove the threat posed by armed gangs and provide immediate protection to critical infrastructure and services. That's in addition to securing the free movement of water, fuel, food and medical supplies from main ports and airports to communities and healthcare facilities. However, the letter also stipulated that the deployment of peacekeeping forces remains a last resort should Haitian authorities prove unable to reverse the deteriorating security situation. Guterres' spokesperson stressed the need for urgent action to alleviate the fuel crisis in Haiti, as the blockage of the port has also contributed to a cholera outbreak.
The current humanitarian response plan for Haiti 2022 remains severely underfunded. It's about under 20%. Currently, we urgently appeal for funds from the international community to address the cholera outbreak, as well as other pressing humanitarian needs in the country. Of course, the ability to address the humanitarian need better is linked to the security situation. And in a statement we issued yesterday, the Secretary General said he remains gravely concerned about the situation in Haiti. He reiterated that the blockage of the Vareux fuel terminal has brought critical services required to prevent the rapid spread of cholera to a standstill, including in the distribution of potable water.
However, the deployment of international forces to the country remains controversial. Many local senators are rejecting the idea of UN peacekeepers, noting that they had been accused of sexual assault and of sparking a cholera epidemic that killed nearly 10,000 people during a 13-year mission in Haiti that ended 5 years ago. Dan Morel, TVB News.
With many parts of the world facing an energy crisis, CLP Power Vice Chair Betty Yuen said on TVB's Straight Talk program that Hong Kong will face higher electricity bills, but at a lower rate of increase than in many other places.
We're running deficits of about $2 billion in our fuel account, basically costs that we haven't yet passed through to customers. But there's a limit to how much the company can tolerate. So unfortunately, energy bills will increase next year. You know, Singapore, Tokyo, their tariffs are 40–50% higher than Hong Kong. The whole world, as I mentioned earlier, is interconnected as far as energy is concerned. But Hong Kong, I think security of supply is no problem.
Yuen, who is also the chair of the Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce, said the city's border restrictions due to the pandemic have made the business sector suffer a lot. She said the city's reputation had been significantly tarnished in the past 3 years. She urged the government to speed up the full reopening of the city's borders, which she said is fundamental to an economic recovery. And in the U.S., a horticulture teacher from Minnesota has grown the heaviest pumpkin ever recorded in the U.S., coming in at a whopping 2,560 pounds, or more than 1 ton. Travis Geinger set the new record en route to winning the 49th annual World Championship Pumpkin Weigh-Off in Half Moon Bay, south of San Francisco. Geinger, who also tasted victory in the same contest in 2020, broke the U.S. record set just last week in New York. Then, a grower revealed a huge pumpkin weighing 2,554 pounds. Still, the U.S. record is somewhat short of the world's heaviest ever pumpkin. A grower in Italy holds that record, having raised a 2,702-pound gourd in 2021. That's the news. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.